Welcome to Drift Off to History, where we bring calm stories for curious minds. Tonight, we embark on a gentle voyage across time and sea as we explore the explorations and voyages of Captain James Cook. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always lovely to imagine all of us scattered quietly across the globe, unwinding together, sharing this moment of calm curiosity. Tonight's journey is a story of ocean breezes and starlit skies, of distant glimmering islands and careful hands mapping coastlines no one from Cook's world had ever seen. A man who began as a farm boy in the Yorkshire countryside and ended up charting more of the world than almost any explorer in history. So find somewhere comfortable. Let your mind soften like the tide, and allow yourself to drift slowly and gently into the adventures of Captain James Cook. Long before he traced coastlines across distant oceans, long before his name was etched into the maps of the world, James Cook was just a quiet boy in the quiet fields of Yorkshire. His world began not with grand discoveries, but with the soft shuffle of boots on dew-covered earth and the lowing of cattle beneath a pale morning sky. The wind moved gently across the open moors, tugging at the grasses like a lullaby. Above him, great clouds passed like slow ships across the heavens. Below, the earth was simple, honest, full of rhythm and routine. He was born on the 27th of October, 1728, in the tiny village of Marton in Cleveland. There was no fanfare, no prophecy, just the warmth of a small hearth and the hush of autumn settling over the northern hills. His father was a Scottish farm labourer, a man of quiet strength, and his mother, a Yorkshire woman, kept the home with hands that knew the rhythm of the seasons. Life in Marton was modest. Carts creaked down narrow lanes, church bells tolled over distant fields, and the sea, though only a few dozen miles away, remained a rumour on the wind. Even as a child, James seemed to carry within him a kind of stillness. He was not one to shout or draw attention, but he watched, always watching. He noticed the way frost settled differently on ploughed soil, how the shadows lengthened unevenly in late afternoon, how birds tilted their wings to catch the breeze just so. His world may have been small, but his curiosity was vast, reaching quietly toward the edges of everything. When he was still young, the Cook family moved to Great Ayton, a village nestled beneath the ancient rise of Rosebery Topping, a lone sloping hill that marked the horizon like a silent guardian. Here, James attended a local school, his tuition paid for by the kindness of a wealthy landowner. And it was in the pages of books, under flickering candlelight, that his mind began to stretch further still. He learned his letters, his sums, and the art of precision. But more than that, he learned to see the world as something that could be measured, mapped, and understood. By his early teens, he was working in a grocer's shop in the fishing village of Staithes. There, in the narrow winding lanes above the harbour, he looked out each day upon the restless water. The scent of salt clung to the air, fishing boats rocked gently in the tide, and something began to stir inside him. Not a hunger for wealth or fame, but something simpler, deeper, a yearning to follow the horizon. That quiet calling would not be ignored. At 17, James left Staithes and travelled south to Whitby, where he apprenticed under a group of Quaker ship owners who operated sturdy coal vessels known as colliers. These were not elegant ships, but broad, dependable workhorses that hauled black stone down the English coast. Yet aboard these vessels, James found something precious: the language of the sea. The swell beneath the hull, the snap of canvas in the breeze, the glint of constellations overhead. The ocean, he discovered, spoke in patterns, in wind and wave, in in compass lines and stars, and James Cook listened. Night after night he stood on deck beneath endless skies, watching, learning, and slowly, reverently committing its secrets to memory. He learned to tie knots not by rote, but by feel, to sense shifts in the wind before the sails whispered their complaint, to calculate position by the angle of the sun and the rhythm of time. There was no rush, no glory, only the patient, deliberate gathering of skill, like raindrops into a still pool. Eventually, his talent could no longer be overlooked. He was offered a position in the Royal Navy, a leap from merchant sailor to military man, from coal hauler to navigator of empire. But in truth, Cook did not change. He remained the same quiet boy at heart, the one who watched the wind, who read the waves, who believed the world could be known, not through conquest, but through care. Before the great voyages, before the maps and the journals and the distant islands with names like poetry, there was just this. A boy from Yorkshire walking a dirt path at dawn, his boots soft on the mossy ground, eyes turned gently. The sea does not reveal itself all at once. It speaks slowly, in murmurs and signs, in long silences and sudden gusts of wind. It is a language learned not through words, but through time, through patient days spent watching the horizon and listening to the creak of wood beneath your feet. It was on the rolling decks of Whitby's coal ships that James Cook first began to understand this ancient tongue. He learned by doing, by hauling ropes until his hands ached, by reading the sky not as a canvas of clouds, but as a guide, a compass, a code. He watched how the sails twisted in shifting winds, how the water changed color with the depth beneath it, how a certain scent on the breeze foretold the coming of a storm. These were not lessons found in books, but truths carried on the backs of waves. Night after night, Cook stood beneath the stars, those same stars he had once gazed at from the moors of Yorkshire, and now they seemed closer, sharper, filled with purpose. He began to map them in his mind, to learn how the heavens could steer a ship more faithfully than any lighthouse. The sea, it turned out, was not chaos. It was a kind of order, one that revealed itself only to those who paid attention. In 1755, after nearly a decade at sea, Cook made a decision that would shape the course of his life. He volunteered for the Royal Navy. It was an unusual move for a merchant sailor, one that meant starting again at a lower rank, relinquishing comfort for duty. But Cook was never one to take the easy path. He saw something in the Navy that others did not, a chance to grow, to learn, and to voyage further than any coal ship could carry him. He quickly proved himself. Calm under pressure, precise in action, he gained a reputation not as a brash adventurer, but as a man of quiet brilliance. When war broke out in North America, the long conflict known as the 7 Years' War, Cook was sent across the Atlantic, not to fight, but to see. While others planned sieges and battles, Cook studied the St. Lawrence River, its shifting currents and hidden shoals. His charts, drawn under threat of enemy fire, were so accurate, so beautifully rendered, that they helped guide British ships safely to Quebec and changed the course of the war. Yet Cook sought no applause. His reward was not in medals or parades, but in the subtle satisfaction of knowing that his lines on paper had made something clearer, safer, more certain. It was in these years that Cook's mind expanded beyond navigation into the deeper waters of science and observation. He devoured books on astronomy and mathematics, poring over them by lantern light while his ship rocked gently on its moorings. Numbers became as important to him as the stars themselves. He learned to use the sextant with surgical accuracy, to calculate longitude with clock and sun, to read the earth and sky like an open manuscript. The Admiralty began to take notice. Here was a man who combined the rarest of traits: a sailor's instincts, a scientist's mind, and an artist's eye. And so, when the Royal Society proposed a voyage to the far side of the world, a journey to observe the rare transit of Venus from the remote island of Tahiti, they needed someone who could do more than command a ship. They needed someone who could see clearly in every sense of the word. They chose Cook. But before the grand voyage began, before the anchors were lifted and the sails unfurled to catch the breath of the Pacific, Cook paused. Perhaps he stood on the deck one last time beneath the familiar English sky. Perhaps he thought of Yorkshire, of Staithes and Whitby, of that boy who once watched the tide roll in and wondered where it might lead. Now he was about to find out. The path ahead was long, thousands of miles across open ocean, islands unseen by European eyes, stars unmeasured, waters uncharted. And yet, Cook did not hesitate. He was not driven by conquest, nor ruled by fear. He was drawn forward by curiosity, that gentle force that opens doors not with noise but with wonder. He had learned the language of the ocean. Now he was ready to speak it. It began quietly, as all great journeys do, not with fanfare, but with the gentle creak of timber beneath steady boots, the soft rustle of canvas as sails caught the breath of the wind. In the waning days of August 1768, the HMS Endeavour slipped from the banks of the Thames, her hull dark and sturdy, her decks alive with quiet anticipation. On board, James Cook stood at the helm, calm, focused, and carrying with him not just the hopes of a nation, but the patient curiosity of a mind that had spent years learning how to listen to the world. This was no ordinary voyage. The Royal Society had chosen Cook to sail halfway across the globe to the island of Tahiti, where he would observe a rare and delicate celestial event, the transit of Venus. It would last only a few hours, a tiny black dot gliding across the face of the sun. But in those fleeting moments lay the possibility of measuring the heavens themselves. By recording the transit from far corners of the Earth, astronomers hoped to determine the distance between the Earth and the Sun, to place humanity more accurately within the great clockwork of the cosmos. Cook's ship, the Endeavour, was not grand or elegant, but she was strong, a repurposed coal ship built to withstand the hardest seas. Aboard her were not soldiers or aristocrats, but thinkers and observers, botanists, astronomers, artists, and enough provisions to last many long months at sea. They carried dried meat, salted fish, barrels of fresh water, pickled cabbage for warding off scurvy, and paper enough to record a new world. The ship sailed first down the coast of Europe, then across the Atlantic, rounding the southern tip of South America, the infamous Cape Horn, where icy winds howled and waves rose like mountains. It was a test of endurance. The crew braved bitter cold, days without sight of land, and the aching isolation of endless blue. But still they pressed on, following Cook's calm command and the gentle curve of his charts. And then, the Pacific, vast, silent, unbroken, a mirror to the sky. It was in this vastness, in the soft cradle of waves beneath an ocean of stars, that the voyage settled into rhythm. Day faded into night, the sails hummed in the breeze. The men went about their duties with quiet discipline. And Cook, notebook always close at hand, measured the heavens, charted the sea, and dreamed of landfall. The Pacific offered no signposts, just starlight and instinct. But Cook had spent his life preparing for this. He trusted the instruments, the shadows, the subtle angles of light on water. Every evening he marked their progress, drawing lines across parchment that would one day become the world's edges. At last, after 8 months at sea, the Endeavour reached Tahiti. a floating paradise set among coral reefs and soft, blooming hills. The air was thick with the scent of fruit and flowers, and the water shimmered in shades of turquoise and gold. The Tahitian people welcomed the newcomers with warmth and curiosity, offering food, gifts, and song. Cook, ever respectful, observed their customs with the same careful attention he gave to the sky. On a quiet hill overlooking the bay, the crew built a small observatory. There, beneath the June sun, they prepared for the moment they had traveled so far to witness. The transit of Venus, that tiny dot passing across the face of the sun, was watched in complete stillness. No cannon fire, no shouts, just silence as the universe moved gently across their instruments. It was a brief, beautiful glimpse into the order of the cosmos, a quiet affirmation that even in the vast, unknowable dark, there was rhythm, there was pattern. But Cook's mission did not end with the transit. Tucked into his sealed orders, only to be opened after the observation, was a second objective, one whispered in the halls of the Admiralty, to search for the mythical southern continent, Terra Australis Incognita, a land thought to lie hidden in the southern seas, balancing the known world. And so, with the stars now behind him and the horizon once more ahead, Cook guided the Endeavour back into the open ocean. They sailed south and west, deeper into mystery. There were no maps to follow now, only the contours of clouds, the scent of distant land, the dreams of old philosophers. And then, one morning, through mist and surf, they saw it. A long, jagged coast stretching into the distance like a memory returning to light. They had reached New Zealand, but that part of the story, the charting of new shores and the drawing of unknown lands, would come next. For now, as the Endeavour drifted gently at anchor, with seabirds circling above and Cook's pen moving steadily across his logbook, there was a rare stillness, a moment of quiet accomplishment. A voyage had begun. A path had been drawn across sky and sea, and the world somehow had grown both larger and more beautifully known. The sea stretched out before them like a sleeping animal, vast and blue, its breath rising in slow waves. After months adrift in the great Pacific, the Endeavour pressed on, sails full of salt-sweet wind, her timbers seasoned by storms and silence alike. Each morning, Cook stood quietly at the rail, scanning the horizon with calm, watchful eyes. The ship, steady as ever, rocked beneath his boots, a world of creaking ropes and murmured orders. And then at last, land appeared, long, green and wild, breaking the silver edge of dawn. It was the east coast of New Zealand, and though the land was not unknown to the indigenous Maori who had lived there for centuries, to the crew of the Endeavour, it was a place of mystery. Towering cliffs gave way to tangled forests. Rivers wound like ribbons through valleys brushed by low-hanging mist. It was beautiful, untamed, and filled with the quiet power of a place that had shaped itself over millennia, undisturbed by distant maps or foreign names. Cook brought the ship to anchor in a sheltered bay, and from there began the slow, deliberate task of charting the coastline, not in haste, but with the steady hand of someone who understood that the true nature of exploration was not glory, but attention. For 6 months he circled both of New Zealand's islands, mapping every curve and inlet with the precision of a painter and the patience of a monk. His charts, drawn with ink and care, would remain remarkably accurate even centuries later. Encounters with the Maori people were cautious and complex. At times there was tension, the fear and friction of two worlds touching for the first time. But there were also moments of connection, shared food, quiet observation, gestures across language. Cook, ever the listener, sought to understand before acting. He collected words, sketched customs, and noted with fascination the strength and beauty of the culture he had come upon. He knew that this was not an empty land, but one already full of meaning. As the seasons turned and the stars shifted overhead, the Endeavour left New Zealand's shores behind and sailed west once more, guided by sun and compass and quiet resolve. And then, in the soft light of an April morning in 1770, a pale stretch of coastline shimmered into view, long, low and dreamlike. Australia. To Cook and his crew, the sight was surreal. They approached with awe, anchoring in a wide, calm bay ringed by bush and soft beaches. The air smelled of eucalyptus and salt. Birds with bright feathers flitted from tree to tree, and the sky itself felt vaster somehow, as if the southern hemisphere held its own kind of silence. This was Botany Bay, a name later given in honor of the abundant plant life discovered by Joseph Banks and Daniel Solander, who wandered the shore with notebooks and wonder in their eyes. They collected blossoms and seeds, delicate ferns and strange leaves, each one a quiet testament to the richness of this new world. Here, the Endeavour lingered. The crew repaired sails, restocked water, and walked among kangaroos and gum trees with a sense of hushed reverence. Cook recorded it all in his journal, not with sweeping proclamations, but with calm observation: the terrain, the animals, the tides. He did not claim the land with thunder or banners. He simply described it, as if sketching the world into being with careful lines and open hands. But even this moment of peace would not last forever. As the ship sailed north along Australia's coast, danger stirred beneath the waves. One moonless night, as the Endeavour drifted quietly over the seemingly calm sea, the sound of splintering wood shattered the silence. They had struck the Great Barrier Reef, a jagged crown of coral hidden just beneath the surface. Panic spread through the decks. The hull had been torn open. Water rushed in. But Cook, steady as always, took command. The crew worked by lantern light, hauling ropes, manning pumps, casting overboard cannon and ballast to lighten the ship. With grit and calm coordination, they brought her to land, a gentle inlet on the far northern coast, where birds chirped overhead and still waters mirrored the trees. There, in that hushed wilderness, they spent 7 long weeks repairing the damage. Wood was cut, nails hammered, tar boiled and brushed in thick coats, and slowly, plank by plank, the Endeavour was made whole again. Those days were not hurried. They passed like water, slow, reflective. The crew fished, explored, and recorded. New creatures were observed, including one strange animal with a bill like a duck, the body of an otter, and the tail of a beaver. The platypus, it would be called. Even nature, it seemed, was blending boundaries in this distant land. When at last the ship was ready, they pushed out once more into the sea, rounding the northern tip of Australia and setting course across the Indian Ocean toward home. Behind them, they left charts that would change the shape of the known world, not the result of conquest, but of attention, care, and quiet perseverance. As the Endeavour disappeared into the horizon, the wind at her back and seabirds trailing like ribbons, the vastness of the journey already felt like a dream. But for Cook, the journey was far from over. The ocean has a way of holding silence. Long after the shouting of waves and the rustle of sails have faded, what remains is stillness, the kind that settles deep within the bones of those who travel far and return changed. When the Endeavour at last turned homeward, her patched hull creaking with age and memory, the world she carried inside her was no longer the same one she had left behind. The journey back across the Indian Ocean was slow, steady, and lined with thought. The tropical waters gave way to cooler winds. Stars shifted overhead, constellations slowly returning to their familiar places in the northern sky. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon in a wash of gold, Cook would retreat below deck to write. His logs were filled with notes and coordinates, but also with quiet reflections, fragments of wonder at the scale of it all, what they had seen, what they had survived, what they had come to know. In March of 1771, the Endeavour limped into the Cape of Good Hope, a last port of call before the final leg of the journey. Here, the men could rest, if only briefly, and look back at the vast curve they had traced around the bottom of the world. From the coral beaches of Tahiti to the uncharted coast of New Holland, they had stitched together a ribbon of experience that would soon redraw the maps of every continent. And yet, it was not the grandeur of discovery that Cook seemed to carry most heavily as he prepared for the final crossing. It was the weight of responsibility. He had seen things few others had seen. Lands teeming with life, cultures rich with story, islands afloat with color and calm. He had measured, mapped, and named. But he had also learned in the quiet, watchful way he always had that these places were not blank spaces waiting to be filled. They were entire worlds, already whole, already wise in their own way. By July, the English Channel lay ahead. The Endeavour, weathered and worn, glided once more into familiar waters. The cliffs of Dover stood like sentinels, white and still. Crowds gathered to see her return. This ship that had vanished into mystery and now returned bearing the breath of new worlds. Cook stepped ashore with no ceremony. No medals were waiting, no parades. Just the hum of the port and the whisper of ropes as they tightened on the docks. He had left England a humble lieutenant. He returned a man who had mapped thousands of miles of coastline with a precision never before seen. He had recorded flora, fauna, languages, stars, fragments of a world so wide it could only be gathered by moving slowly, carefully, respectfully across it. In the quiet months that followed, he worked with the same diligence he had shown at sea. His maps were published. His journals, filled with exacting detail, found their way into libraries and drawing rooms. Scholars studied his measurements. Explorers studied his methods. His observations of the transit of Venus helped refine the scale of the solar system. His coastal charts guided ships for generations to come. But perhaps his greatest contribution was not what he measured, but how he moved through the world. Not with haste, but with humility. Not to conquer, but to understand. As the autumn leaves began to fall once more in Yorkshire, one might imagine him walking again among the fields of his youth. The same wind brushing past his face, the same stars overhead. But now, he had followed those stars to the edge of the known world and brought back not just knowledge, but reverence. He had seen the earth as it truly was, vast, alive, intricate, and he had returned quieter, deeper, shaped by the journey. And though his feet now rested once again on solid ground, some part of him, perhaps, still drifted gently with the tide. There are journeys that move outward, across lands and oceans, and there are those that move inward, into silence, solitude, and the quiet unknown. In 1772, only a year after returning from his first great voyage, James Cook was once again preparing to sail. This time, he would not chase the warmth of island breezes or trace sunlit coasts. He would turn instead toward the cold, toward a place of fog, frost, and imagined land, a place where the maps ended and myth began. The goal was simple in theory, though daunting in practice: to search for Terra Australis Incognita, the great southern continent long thought to exist beneath the edge of the world. Philosophers, scholars, and explorers had dreamed of it for centuries, a hidden mass of land that balanced the northern continents, perhaps lush, perhaps frozen, perhaps something else entirely. No one knew, and so Cook was asked once more to sail into uncertainty. This time he was given not one ship, but two. HMS Resolution, which he commanded, and HMS Adventure under the leadership of Tobias Furneaux. The Resolution was a sturdy vessel, carefully reinforced for ice, her hull thick and her sails broad. She was not fast, but she was strong, and she would need to be. They departed in July 1772, leaving behind the green softness of English summer for a long descent into the Southern Ocean. As the ships crossed the equator, the familiar warmth faded. The skies grew grayer, the winds sharpened, and gradually, the world around them changed. The stars overhead rearranged themselves into unfamiliar constellations, and the sea grew colder with each passing mile. By December, they had entered uncharted waters south of the Indian Ocean. Icebergs loomed in the mist, vast and silent, like ancient floating mountains. Snow began to dust the rigging, and the sails cracked as frost formed along their edges. The sea was a deep, glassy slate, smooth at times, then suddenly rough, like a beast turning in its sleep. The cold was not cruel, but constant. It seeped into the boards, the wool, the bones, and yet there was beauty in it, in the way light glinted off jagged ice, in the silence between gusts of wind, in the sight of seals slipping through frigid water with effortless grace. Cook, wrapped in heavy coat and calm purpose, stood often on deck, taking readings, scanning the horizon, and recording the changing face of this distant sea. They pushed farther south than any ship had ever sailed, reaching latitudes cloaked in cloud and snow. Still no land appeared, only ice, stretching to the edge of vision. The mythical continent, if it existed, was hiding behind walls of winter. But Cook did not despair. He knew that even when one did not find what one sought, the journey still held its own quiet truths. He mapped islands along the way, remote specks like South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, naming them carefully, noting wind patterns and currents, recording temperatures and wildlife. To many, these scraps of land might have seemed bleak, forgotten, but to Cook, they were puzzle pieces in the great geography of Earth. Even in the coldest corners, he found meaning. There were moments of hardship. Blizzards tore through the sails. Ice threatened to trap the ships in its frozen grip. The Adventure, separated by storm, was lost from view, and for months the Resolution sailed alone. Supplies dwindled, fingers numbed, but Cook's steady hand and calm manner held the crew together. He made time to brew spruce beer from pine needles to ward off scurvy. He ensured that charts were kept, journals updated, spirits tended like small fires in the dark. By early 1774, with no continent discovered and the season growing harsher, Cook turned north once more. He had not found Terra Australis, but he had proven through patient exploration that if it did exist, it was likely icebound and inhospitable. Not the fertile, undiscovered world so long imagined. And yet, what he brought back was just as valuable. A map of the Southern Ocean's breadth, a record of life at the edge of the world, and the quiet, enduring proof that knowledge is found not only in what is discovered, but in the act of looking. As the Resolution sailed toward warmer latitudes, passing once more beneath unfamiliar stars, the crew began to smile again. The ice melted from the rigging, the sails filled with gentler winds, and somewhere on the deck, Cook stood again beneath the sky, sextant in hand, eyes turned to the horizon. The cold had not hardened him. If anything, it had deepened his stillness, like a lake settling beneath snow. He had been to the ends of the earth, and returned more quietly determined than ever. After months of ice and silence, the return to the Pacific felt like waking from a long white dream. As the Resolution sailed northward, away from the ghostly cliffs of iceberg and fog, warmth returned, first as a gentle change in the air, then as a golden glow upon the waves. and finally in full, fragrant and rich, alive with birdsong and blossom. Islands began to rise once more on the horizon, each one wrapped in coral reefs, ringed by palms, and softened by the steady rhythm of the sea. This was a world Cook already knew, Tahiti, Tonga, and the scattered jewels of Polynesia. But now he returned not as a stranger, but as a guest reacquainted with old friends. The breeze carried familiar scents, smoke from cooking fires, crushed flowers, the faint salt of sea spray on warm stone. Canoes met the ship with laughter. Garlands were offered. Drums murmured in the distance like the heartbeat of the islands themselves. Here, Cook's pace slowed. The rush of discovery gave way to observation, to quiet immersion. He spent days walking the beaches, watching children play in the surf, speaking gently with chiefs and elders beneath the shade of trees. He listened to songs sung in languages that rolled like poetry across the water. He watched dances that told stories older than any map. And always, he wrote, not just charts and measurements, but impressions, thoughts, fragments of connection. His journals from this time are not merely records, they are reflections. On these islands, life moved differently. There was rhythm, ceremony, and calm. Time was marked not by clocks, but by tides, by fruit ripening on branches, by stars rising and falling in the night. The people Cook met, especially in Tahiti and the surrounding archipelagos, lived with the sea as an old companion. They navigated by memory and moonlight, their canoes slicing through the water with an ease that made even the British sailors pause in admiration. It was here that Cook found a kind of wisdom, not the knowledge of books, but of place, of harmony between people and land, between earth and sky. He did not romanticize them, but he did respect them. He studied their customs, learned their words, tried to understand the stories they told in song and gesture. Some of the men on board the Resolution grew fond of life ashore, forming bonds and even families, their time among the islanders becoming something deeper than diplomacy, something human and enduring. In Tonga, often called the Friendly Islands, Cook was welcomed with generous ceremony. Feasts were laid out in patterns across long palm leaves. Baskets of breadfruit, coconut, and roast pig were brought forth with quiet pride. There was music and laughter, and games played beneath the open sky. Though later histories would cast a shadow over these exchanges, Cook himself seemed moved by the grace and dignity with which he was received. Even as he documented and mapped, measured and named, Cook showed restraint. He did not force, did not claim. He walked the edge of understanding, content to observe more than impose. There is a softness in his writings from this time, a tone that suggests he recognized that he was the one learning, the student, not the master. And in return, the Pacific gave him its peace. Night after night, the ship rested at anchor in calm bays, and the sea shimmered with stars so clear they seemed close enough to touch. The moon cast silver paths across the water, and the breeze whispered through the palms like a lullaby. The crew, weary from years of hardship, found brief sanctuary here, in hammocks strung between trees, in laughter shared over evening fires, in the gentle kindness of strangers. When at last the Resolution sailed away, leaving the islands behind in the soft haze of morning light, it felt not like a departure, but a return to motion after rest. The men stood at the rail in silence, watching the shore slip slowly from view. There were no flags raised, no lines drawn on maps to mark possession, only footprints in the sand, slowly disappearing with the tide. Cook had come to know these islands not as curiosities, but as homes different from his own, yet no less rich in knowledge or meaning. In their songs, their skies, their seas, He had glimpsed a different way of being in the world, and that perhaps was the greatest discovery of all. By 1776, the world had already grown quieter around James Cook. His charts had redrawn coastlines, his journals had opened distant lands to curious minds, and his name had begun to circle through Europe not with boast or flourish, but with quiet admiration. He could have remained home, surrounded by accolades, resting in the comfort of his legacy, but the sea still called, not with urgency, but with its soft, persistent whisper, as it always had. There was one more journey, one more horizon. This time, it was the north, the cold edge of the world where ice and mist conspired to hide a long-sought secret, the Northwest Passage. For centuries, sailors had dreamed of a maritime route above the Americas, a hidden corridor that might shorten the path between oceans. No one had found it. Many had vanished trying, and so Cook, trusted above all others, was asked to try once more. He departed in July 1776 aboard HMS Resolution with a second ship, HMS Discovery, following closely. It would be his third and final voyage. This time, the path led westward once again, past the familiar archipelagos of the Pacific, through the waves he had come to know like old companions. But something had shifted. The pace was slower, the sense of destination fainter. It was as though the voyage itself had become the purpose. A last, long breath, taken before silence. They stopped again in Tahiti, in Tonga, in the gentle islands that had once offered so much peace. But Cook was no longer the same man who had arrived years before, barefoot on coral shores, marveling at songs and sails. Time had pressed its weight upon him. He was older now, wearier, his body lined with years of wind and water. Still, the stars guided him. Still, he wrote each day. Still, he watched, listened, and learned. As the ships sailed north into uncharted waters, the sea grew restless again. Winds sharpened, the sky took on a steely cast, and then, on the horizon, land. It was the jagged, snow-fringed coastline of what is now Alaska. Here the ships turned east, tracing the rim of the continent, seeking some crack in the ice where a passage might lie hidden. Days turned to weeks. The ocean narrowed, glaciers loomed in the distance, their pale faces shining under the Arctic sun. Cook pressed onward. He mapped every inlet, every bay. He noted the migration of whales, the rhythm of tides, the way the water changed color as it moved among islands. Always the same question lingered. Was this the way through? Was the Northwest Passage near, just beyond the next bend? But each promising turn brought only another dead end. Ice choked the channels. The way closed in silence. And so he turned back, not in failure, but in recognition. Some paths are not meant to be forced. Some mysteries must remain for a time unsolved. The ships returned south, and in January of 1779 they reached the islands of Hawaii, a place of volcanic beauty, of black sand beaches and emerald forests. The people there were generous, curious, and rich in spirit. For a time, the ships rested once more in calm waters, the crew welcomed with music, fruit, and ceremony. But tensions began to rise. Small misunderstandings, moments of confusion that, like a slow-building storm, gathered without warning. It was here, on the shores of Kealakekua Bay, that Cook's journey came to an end. In the course of a sudden confrontation, he was killed, not in battle, not by grand design, but in a brief, tragic moment of human error and fear. The details matter less than the echo. He had lived his life watching, charting, and listening. And in the end, the ocean received him once more. News of his death traveled slowly across the sea, carried by the wind and the return of ships now heavy with memory. In England, his loss was mourned not with parade, but with reverence. He had not claimed empires or raised banners. He had not ruled nor conquered, but he had given something far more lasting. He had mapped the edges of the world with clarity and care. He had shown that discovery could be an act of understanding. And as the sun set over the horizon where sea and sky met in silent gold, the name James Cook drifted gently into history. Not shouted, but spoken softly, like a prayer whispered by the tide. Long after the sails had fallen still, long after the Resolution faded into mist and memory, the maps remained. Lines drawn with a steady hand, notes written in quiet ink, curves of coastlines once unknown now made visible to all. The legacy of James Cook did not arrive with noise or thunder, but like the tide, calm, rhythmic, enduring. He was not born into privilege. There were no titles before his name in childhood, no promises made by birthright or inheritance. And yet, through discipline, patience, and a remarkable clarity of thought, he reshaped the world's understanding of itself. From the cold edges of Antarctica to the soft lagoons of Tahiti, from the endless sweep of Australia's coast to the snow-capped horizons of Alaska, Cook gave form to the forgotten spaces on the globe, not with conquest, but with observation. His maps were more than mere drawings. They were portraits of the earth, honest, detailed, filled with care. Generations of sailors would follow his charts, trusting in his precision, relying on his judgment. But perhaps his greater gift was in how he carried himself, as a voyager who sought understanding over possession, as a leader who chose reason over pride, and as a man who let the sea shape him rather than trying to shape it. There are some who debate his legacy, as all legacies must be weighed. For even quiet footsteps leave marks. His journeys were part of a larger tide, of empires expanding, of cultures meeting, sometimes gently, sometimes not. But in Cook's personal writings, there is no hunger for power, no longing for domination, only a consistent, steady awe for the scale and beauty of the world. He was, in the end, a listener, a man who stood beneath stars and made sense of their positions, a man who studied shorelines and found poetry in their patterns, a man who could look at a bay, a reef, a curl of wind, and see both danger and design. He moved slowly, carefully, and never lost sight of the fact that knowledge is not a thing to be taken, but a thing to be earned, with time, with patience, and with respect. In the centuries since his final voyage, the world has changed in ways even Cook could not have imagined. Satellites now trace the paths he once sailed. Digital maps flicker to life in the palms of our hands. And yet, even with all our advances, we still return to his lines, his records, his words, because what he gave us was more than navigation. He gave us an example of calm courage, of thoughtful exploration, and of the quiet dignity of seeking to know the world not through force, but through wonder. And so his story drifts onward, not as a tale of conquest, but as a lullaby of curiosity. A soft reminder, carried on wind and water, that even in the vastness of sea and sky, it is possible to find a path, to follow a question, to move gently, and to return wiser than when we left. As the stars rise once more over the invisible trail he left behind, we remember him not for how far he traveled, but for how deeply he looked, and how quietly he listened. We've sailed beside James Cook through starlit seas and silent shores, traced coastlines drawn with quiet care, and watched the world unfold through the eyes of a man who traveled not to conquer, but to understand. From Yorkshire fields to frozen waters, from coral lagoons to the cold breath of the Arctic, we've drifted gently through time and tide. If your eyes are already closed, let the story settle in your thoughts like the fading light of a lantern at sea. Let your breath slow, your body soften, and allow sleep to carry you wherever it may. But if you're still with me, still awake beneath the stars, you're welcome to stay a little longer. In a moment, soothing ambient music will begin, wrapping you in a gentle stillness for the next half hour. You can let your mind wander, or perhaps explore another story when you're ready. Wherever you are, thank you for listening. Sleep well and drift off peacefully to history. you.